Welcome to Skybound Ops.
Hey everybody, this is Ralph with Skybound Ops. Welcome to a new episode. Today, it's really exciting. I'm joined by Myles Corey, founder of Spaero. Myles has nearly 2 decades inside the aviation supply chain, including close to a decade leading excess aviation. And it's that time on the trading side, living with the problem rather than just looking at it from the outside, that I believe, how do I say this, shaped the argument he's going to make today, or the conversation at least, hopefully no argument. So because this isn't really a conversation about one company, I don't think, it's a bigger question. So why does an industry as sophisticated as what we do, as sophisticated as aviation, still procure critical materials through a fragmented digital environment? And I second that, by the way. And what should the future look like? And I think that's what we'd like to talk about today. Myles has a genuinely provocative answer and a phrase that runs through everything that he's building. Connect, don't replace. I love it, by the way. We'll get into exactly what that means for ERPs, for OEMs and portals, brokers, AI, AOG procurement, and everything in between. And because he's a new dad, how a 1-year-old daughter has completely changed the way he measures progress at home and at Spaero. So stick around. Myles, welcome to Skybound Ops again. Glad to have you here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you, Ralph, and thank you for inviting me on the show.
My pleasure, man. If you know, for anybody who doesn't know, I had chased Myles around for a very long time, and he finally said okay, so I feel pretty excited. Myles, thank you for joining me today. Before we dive in, I want to ask you a really tough question. Where are you calling in from today?
In England, in the UK.
Welcome to Skybound Arms. I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank
Uh,
you for having me on, Ralph.
I'm really excited to learn about your story. I really am. I've followed you for a while, and we've hit or miss each other for a while, but I'm excited to have you here. But one of the first things that I wanted to ask you is, I know that we talked about almost 2 decades, 16 plus years in aviation. Can you talk a little bit more about that story? What actually brought you in? I'm interested in knowing. I think a lot of people want to know that too.
Yeah, sure. So I actually fell into aviation more than anything. I think we hear this quite a lot from anyone that's involved in aviation. I started in the industry about 16 years ago and very quickly became fascinated by it. I think there's something about the industry, possibly like the complexity, the pace, particularly in AOG scenarios, and you're trying to solve problems quickly. I think that intensity kind of drew me in. And over the years, I moved deeper into the parts supply chain, eventually building and running Excess Aviation. That meant that I got to experience procurement from the supplier side every day, receiving RFQs, sourcing the material, quoting airlines, MROs, dealing with the AOG scenarios, the repairs, the logistics providers, and all of the systems in between that. And the longer I spent in the industry, the more something bothered me. I mean, we work in one of the most technologically advanced industries in the world, but the way we buy and sell material is still very fragmented. It still seems very archaic, and it's just, the technology exists, but it hasn't kind of all been brought together. So everyone's still scrambling around trying to find the component when it is available. It's just in a different source to where maybe the buyer's looking. And you have these, we have got many different ERP systems, many different portals, OEM portals, supplier portals, marketplaces, listing services, and email. And all of those systems are connecting the same transaction effectively. But the thing that I see as the broken part of the industry is that the human being the buyer, is effectively the API layer. They're the thing that's connecting everything together. So
It is.
Spaero originally came from wanting to improve that buying and selling process. But the more we've built, the more time we've spent, and the more time we've spent talking to airlines and our customers and understanding their workflows deeper from their perspective. Those discussions ultimately have led us into actually a transition and evolution in the Spaero journey, where we've shifted our focus from trying to build something that I felt was going to fix this problem to actually looking at the technologies that already exist and bringing them all together. And that's really what I focus on. of what I've learned from
I,
being at Excess.
it's first of all, I think that's absolutely amazing, and second of all, I chuckled, and I'm still chuckling a little bit when you said you fell into aviation because my story, which is this is not about, but my story is I literally say I fell into aviation accidentally about 20 years ago. So it's kind of weird and exciting at the same time to hear somebody else say that. So you talked about this a little bit. I wanted to ask you one more thing as we get going. What is the biggest thing you think the industry gets wrong about procurement? I think you just talked about the symptoms a little bit. Let's back that up a little bit. What do you think they get wrong about procurement?
I think often what's happening is that we're confusing digitizing a process with actually improving the process. A lot of procurement is already digital. So we have, all these digital services with different ERPs, listing services, portals, email systems, automation systems, and increasingly we're seeing more and more AI introduced into the industry. But the buyer is still that person joining all of those things together. So they'll take the requirement from one system, search several other systems, log into many different portals, send RFQs, chase the suppliers, compare them responses for the most part manually, and then put everything back into their ERP system. So I believe that we've digitized lots of individual steps and to a really good point, but we've not necessarily connected that journey for the buyer. And that's the distinction I think the industry needs to start talking about. I don't believe the next evolution in the industry is another portal. I think it's getting the systems we already have, and they're incredible systems actually working together properly.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I agree. I mean, I think I agree with that entire statement, but I agree a lot with digitizing instead of improving. I see that from my side of things almost on a daily basis. So let me ask you this then. Why rather hasn't aviation solved this already? And if the technology is there, what do you think is stopping everybody?
I think the interesting answer is that I don't think technology is the biggest problem. I just mentioned this, I touched upon it earlier.
Hmm.
Most of the technology required already exists, and the technological processes exist. So we have the APIs, the structured data, the automation, the AI, the digital documentation, and the secure authentication that already exists. But the biggest challenge is getting organizations to allow and these are the technology organizations to allow those technologies to work together. Now, I understand there are, commercial reasons behind why why companies want to keep their customers operating within their own ecosystems. But what I see is what's good for an individual technology business isn't necessarily what is the ideal outcome or the best way of making it most efficient for the buyer. So long term, I think the buyers are going to increasingly expect interoperability rather than simply accepting being contained within a closed environment.
I like that. And I think you're onto something. And before we dive right back in a little bit, I forgot to ask you a question earlier, which I think could let me know and let everybody listening know a little bit more about this. Can you just back up a little bit more before we move forward and talk a little bit about how you got into aviation, just maybe from a 20 or 30,000 foot overview?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I always, from a young boy, I wanted to be a pilot. But I was toyed between. So I'm very interested in how things work or how things come together. I'm very interested in like ancient archaeology. Machu Picchu, the Great Pyramids in Egypt, Petra in Jordan. Some of the architecture that
Hmm.
exists around the world is just incredible. So it went from a young boy, I've looked at cars and different mechanical systems, how they work, how architecture comes together to make buildings, and I've always just been very fascinated. So the idea of these big, incredible flying things, I always wanted to be very much involved with them. So whether it was being a pilot or an engineer, that it was definitely something that I wanted to be involved with from quite a young age. I have vision problems. I'm not blind or anything, but I'm short-sighted, so I have to wear glasses to drive and things. So becoming a pilot or being sponsored for a pilot program possibly wasn't. I don't think it was within my reach, but becoming an engineer was definitely something that I pursued. But then I fell into doing the opposite of repairing aircraft or the inspections on aircraft to actually disassembling them. So we went from disassembling aeroplanes in the UK to then getting the opportunity to go to South Africa doing it, and we traveled around different parts of Africa, different parts of Europe and Central Asia, disassembling aircraft. And the gentleman that I worked with at the time, they set up a aircraft parts business. And I never had any interest in sales or the commercial element of the industry. We were involved in the disassembly, actually. We were involved, and we was often approached to procure parts. And that's
Mhm.
really where I got my first taste of how fragmented it all was. And it didn't occur to me, it wasn't really of a concern to me of how fragmented it was at that point, but it was very apparent. And then as I got involved in Exis Aviation as business development and then eventually managing director and eventually bought the business, it just really stood out every day. Every time we receive an inquiry and you go and buy these, go out to source the material, you're constantly battling closed systems, or technologies that don't. There's so many manual processes between your technology, your ERP system, then your email. You're going into data listing services, then sending emails, chasing suppliers. So I really did start to understand the pain points that the buyers experience every single day.
It's actually that you bring up a really, really good point. You talked a little bit about yourself, which I asked. You talked a little bit about people and some of the stuff that I think sort of stops them in between from getting that. So let me ask you a two-part question, if I could. What would you say to technology companies that don't want to open their ecosystem? And at the same time, if you could redesign aviation procurement, what would that look like?
Okay, well, I'll start with your first question. So, what would I say to technology companies that don't want to open their ecosystems? I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, and I totally understand why they wouldn't want to open their technology systems up as like an open API or any of those kind of bases, because technology businesses, they've spent years and millions of dollars building a platform, and of course you want to protect your commercial position as a business. So I completely understand it. But
Okay.
I think there's a difference between protecting your intellectual property or the process that your system does something and preventing customers from choosing how their operational data is used or how they access things that they're currently paying for. And I think the market will increasingly make that distinction. I think the technology businesses that embrace the interoperability that I mentioned earlier, and it's a real buzzword in our organization, um, may actually become stronger because they become part of a much larger ecosystem. The
Right.
alternative is trying to keep customers inside increasingly isolated environments while the rest of the technology world moves towards connectivity. And I'm
Okay.
not convinced that's sustainable long term. I think the customers are going to start demanding better service from them technology companies. But I'm not here to tell them what to do. It's just if it would be my advice to start moving or opening their mind up towards that kind of model. And then, sorry, Ralph, I think I've gone off on that one. What was your second question? If I could
It's okay.
redesign.
First of all, I agree with what you said. I think the public will dictate the next evolution into what's coming up because a lot of people are trying to go after and are starting to go after what you're talking about. But the second part of that question was if you could redesign aviation procurement from scratch, and I think maybe there's a lot of that in what you do, what would that look like?
Do you know, I think that's where I've gone. That's where my focus has kind of shifted on the Spaero journey because I tried to design and build out what the aviation procurement should look like from scratch. So from building the original Spaero marketplace.
Hmm.
But now I think I wouldn't start by building that enormous system. If I could restart again now, I wouldn't start by trying to build an enormous system and trying to convince everybody to move on to it. I think I'd actually do the complete opposite. I think airlines, suppliers, OEM portals, the data listing services, they all exist for a purpose, and everyone's got so familiar with them and so comfortable using them. I don't think that replacing them systems or trying to build something that is better than them systems is really our objective or what I see as a good outcome. But I do believe that those systems should be able to communicate if the customer of them systems wants it to communicate. I think a requirement is created in the airline's ERP system, maybe in the maintenance department, and
Hmm.
that should be capable of moving through the entire supply chain digitally. So from sourcing, sending the RFQs, receiving the quotations and the documentation, to the eventual purchase, the logistics movements of the components, and ultimately all of that transaction, all of those transaction records and all of the paperwork should ultimately go back into the airline's audit trail without somebody having to manually rebuild that transaction at every single step and at the end again. So my vision of a that's effectively my vision of a connected aviation supply chain, not one company controlling everything or rebuilding everything or trying to build one system that conquers all. I think an ecosystem where everything and everybody who are already involved can participate is a good outcome for it.
So in that system, I like that. I think I follow. So in that system, what do you think happens to everyday suppliers like brokers or distributors in your vision? Does technology eventually remove them, enable them, or does it even touch them?
I no, I don't believe it. So sorry, what's your question? What happens to them?
Yeah, what happens to brokers and distributors in that vision in terms of everything connected that we were just talking about?
Well, I think good distributors and good brokers, they solve real life problems. They hold inventory, they find difficult to find material. They understand the market, they provide credit, commercial terms, manage logistics sometimes as well, take commercial risk, and they often solve challenges that a computer system or as we would know it as an algorithm simply couldn't solve. So I think what technology should remove from it is doubling up of information where it doesn't add value. If somebody has the right component with the right documentation at the right price in the right place, then they should have the opportunity to compete for that requirement. The strongest suppliers should actually benefit from greater transparency because their service and performance become more visible.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, in that what I eventually envision, even though this isn't about me, but what I eventually envision is the people that can do A, B, and C, as you said, at the right time and place, should be able to do it more, and the people
Yeah.
that can't, in my humble opinion, probably should find the things that they actually need to do a little bit better on. At least that's how I take that a little bit. So if I can switch gears for just a little bit, everywhere I turn to, and I'm going to give you a 30-second speech from my head, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Everywhere
Yeah.
I turn to, it's AI, AI, AI. And I love it. I really do. I'm not arguing for it or against it. I think it's part of the future. What I personally don't like is AI for the sake of AI. But you can apply that argument to a lot of things. So this isn't technically just an AI conversation. But in your opinion, as it relates to AI in the future, does AI eventually replace the aviation buyer?
No, no, and I don't think framing AI in that way. I think framing AI in that way actually misses the opportunity. I don't want AI, and I don't think any of us want AI making uncontrolled airworthiness or commercial decisions. And what I want AI doing, and I think this is where AI is really good. I want AI doing the repetitive work surrounding those decisions. So searching however many sources that the buyer are using, different systems that they're using, normalizing the 40 different formatted quotations that come back in, identifying missing information, chasing suppliers, highlighting unusual lead times or any
Hmm.
discrepancies in paperwork. And then putting good information in front of an experienced human being. I personally want a human being making that decision in the end, and I don't
100%.
yeah, I think the AI should just be giving the human more time to think and more time to actually make a calculated decision rather than, and we're a very safety forward industry. I think if we give the buyer more time to review the paperwork and be buying the right component, we may actually be preventing some scenarios that exist in the industry where people just slide through like counterfeit parts. It
Right.
would allow more time to actually make those decisions rather than doing it in high intensity situations.
I agree. I agree. In my humble opinion, again, and then I'll move on. I think AI is an enabler, and by definition, it's either going to amplify good or bad. And the more we use it for good, the better. Yesterday I was writing something and I wrote down something and it says, if, sorry, I'm just reading to make sure that I do it right. If
Okay,
you need AI to fix your broken workflow, you don't have a workflow. And if I apologize if I heard that somewhere and I'm not attributing it to the right person, but I thought that that was absolutely amazing. And I
fantastic.
think it's in line with exactly what you just said. Uh,
Yeah.
Speaking of helping people, so let's shift gears a little bit to what does AOG procurement look like in the future, maybe with that technology too.
Well, I think the AOG workflow is, I wouldn't say it's wrong because it works. And I think that's the reason no one looks at it in any way. That's that, no one tweaks it. But really, an AOG requirement is just a normal RFQ with a little red written AOG label next to it. And
Hmm.
then people use that little red AOG label in scenarios where it's not actually AOG, and it kind of ruins it for the people that are actually AOG.
And actual AOGs, yep.
Yeah, so I believe that entire workflow should change. I think the system should understand urgency, search immediately, so not be when once the engineer raises that as demand in the system, not be waiting for the buyer to then action it and start searching all them systems. We can use AI to search that immediately, prioritize credible stock from credible
Right,
suppliers, contact those credible suppliers, escalate the unanswered RFQs, and there's different ways we can do that. Not just via email. We can be doing automated telephone calls, comparing the logistics options ahead of actually making the decision. Because for the most part, the wait, if you're going buying it from someone in the UK and delivering it to the US, or you're buying it from Europe to the US, for the most part, the weight and dimensions of that component are the same. So there is already systems that exist that can give you at least a quick summary of what that is likely to cost to move
right.
that part. Surface documentation, discrepancies quickly, and keep the buyer informed, and potentially involved, as I mentioned, potentially involve the dedicated logistics companies to do the customs clearance. Ahead of the purchase order being maybe not that quickly, but we can make it that seamless, so the entire journey just feeds into the next party. So you're effectively compressing what might be hours of manual activity
Right.
into minutes. And I think that's what we're both doing the same, both on the same side of this industry where we're
Right.
selling time and we're selling time saving products. Um,
Absolutely.
and there still needs to be accountability in there. And I think that's another part of it as well, where people, and I'm not accusing anybody in particular here, but we have RFQs come through that just have this red label next to it saying AOG, and then you don't
Hmm.
receive the order for 3 days. Was that AOG or was that urgent? And I think there needs to just be a
Correct.
little bit of accountability to that as well. So feedback mechanisms where the buyer and the supplier are both benefiting from a newly designed system.
I like that. So I think you just said in a better way what I meant by AI as an enabler, because I think it helps us all uncover that. And ultimately, I can sum up 3 hours worth of conversation I can have about AI by saying what I want AI to do is to enable my team to behave and perform like my top 10%. And I think those are the foundational pillars that we're talking about that would enable them to do that. So speaking of that accountability and speaking of the ability to be able to uncover a little bit more or better or faster, could aviation procurement eventually become predictive under that scenario?
I don't believe that it will as a whole, but I do believe that parts of it absolutely will become predictive. If you combine all of the maintenance requirements with historical consumption, fleet information, and then combine that into the supply chain, so you can see what inventory is available, supplier performance, so we know which suppliers to be going to, and
Hmm.
and assessing the market availability. I think there are situations and scenarios where the supply chain could start preparing the buyer before the buyer actually raises, sorry,
Correct.
preparing for the buyer before the buyer actually knows that that requirement has been raised. And when I'm not talking about like autonomous purchasing of anything or everything, But perhaps something along the lines of, the AI or an assistant, an AI sort of generated assistant saying you're likely to require these components over the next 60 days because we know that in this other part of the world, this particular component every 1,000 or
Hmm.
10,000 cycles it fails, and yours has been installed for 9,900. So in the next 60 days. You're likely to require these. Availability seems to be tightening up on these two components, and lead
Hmm.
time has increased hugely on this one. Would you like us to start sourcing this now ahead of it being it? So I think that there are particular elements of it that could become a lot more proactive rather than reactive, but that is going to be a staged journey, I believe.
I like that. And one of the things that you said I like with a lot, remind me to tell you some other time about vendor scoring and vendor reapprovals and where I think that fits into the conversation, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
But picking up from what you just talked about, well, coming from you, the horse's mouth, where does Spaero fit into all of this?
I know where it was. It's evolved. Our focus has completely shifted. So a Spaero is our attempt to demonstrate that a connected model is possible. We haven't got it connected to everything right now, but we have it connected to some of the bigger purchasing sources. But I don't want the vision to become everyone must use Spaero because that contradicts my entire argument about connecting all of the systems in the industry. If you've got excellent, sourcing platforms or portals, OEM portals or supplier portals or electronic data interchanges, anything that, any technologies that people are using, keep it. That's not what we're saying. I think if a supplier is invested heavily in their architecture, keep it. We're not trying to push everybody and say you must use Spaero. But I think Spaero should help push the industry in the direction of connecting those environments and orchestrating the activity that happens between them. Ultimately, success for me isn't about replacing aerospace technology or any of the systems that exist. It's making that ecosystem work better together for the stakeholders that are actually using it.
So another tool in the toolbox, just a pretty damn good tool, right?
Yeah, another tool in the toolbox. Yeah, and I think what we try to build with us with Assist. I don't want to make this into a sales campaign, but where we have a buyer will be logging into on average around six systems. So they'll have their aircraft manufacturer, the
Hmm.
different engine manufacturers, the consumable manufacturers, your data listing services, and typically they'll have two of those where they're logging into all of these different tools over and over, and it's just a repetitive task. We
Right.
built one tool that could go into all of those effectively orchestrate the entire journey for the buyer. So it would log into every single one, pull back a list of suppliers, email the
Right.
suppliers, chase the suppliers, pull back the results, and do the same with the e-commerce stores and portals.
It's funny, the industry, right? Because change the details around the process is still the same. And as you said, I don't want to make this into a sales component, but that behavior exists almost everywhere that I look.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Multiple logins, multiple behavior, repetitive behavior, manual this, repeat, 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 repeat. And it adds up, in my opinion, it adds up, but that's neither here nor there. Based on everything that you just said, what's something or some things that you've changed your mind about while you were building Spaero?
I think I've kind of touched upon this, but I'll just re-go.
Okay.
Pardon me if I'm repeating myself, but I think what I tried to do in the first place was when I first started developing Spaero, and this was back in 2020, just straight
Hmm.
after the UK went into lockdown, is I was trying to build the destination of how I saw it, the industry connecting, the buyers and sellers connecting. In the future. So that I started with the long-term goal and I tried to build that out. And over time, I've realized that the bigger opportunity isn't necessarily, and I mentioned this in the last question, isn't necessarily getting people to move to a new system and saying, these are our features, advantages, and benefits, and they're better than this other system that you're using. What we've come to realize the bigger opportunity is actually connecting the places that the buyer are already using, keeping people in the place that they already are. So we'll meet you where you are. And I think that was quite a fundamental shift for us. The question stopped being around like how do we bring the aviation supply chain onto our platform and became how do we how do we make the aviation supply chain act like one connected chain? And I think the second question was far more interesting. We have a lot more fun addressing this problem. So we've completely shifted our focus.
I love it.
So that's
I
something
love
that I've
it.
changed my mind about is I think anyone that's going to go into building any kind of technology, try and look at building it in segments and proving it first, proving your first segment first, rather than doing what I did and try and build the entire journey. One, I forgot what the term is, but like one tool for all jobs. It's kind of like the what do they call them? Mole grips. Perfect tool. The wrong tool for every job is.
Absolutely. No, no, I mean, it makes perfect sense instead of just being the solution that contradicts everything in that philosophy that you talked about. It's part of the solution, and hopefully it's the right part of the right solution at the right time.
There's just something else I've noticed as well
What's
whilst
that?
whilst building this. Something else I learned on this journey was when you go and build them new technologies, and you must have the same with ERP.Aero, where you build out the entire tool, and when you go and demonstrate it to any particular client, if it's missing one feature or it's missing something that they thought it should be able to do, not necessarily because their current system does it, but just because you're now demoing something new to them,
Hmm.
they kind of I've run into this scenario where lots of stakeholders expect this fully matured, everybody's using it, everybody's connected to it from day one, and they
I
don't
know.
quite, there's a everyone's screaming about change, from a supplier side, OEMs, aircraft manufacturers, everybody wants change, everybody wants everyone visiting their portal, everybody wants all these things, but the kind of this expectation that the solution is going to just enter the industry on day one and everybody's going to
Correct.
find out about it and all be
On
as
day one.
proactive as each other on day one and just connect straight into it. And unfortunately, that's not a reality that I think we're going to meet. So that's where I said in my earlier about building this out in sections, in segments.
I love it. It's I can go back and forth with stories like that for a while, but it hit a nerve in a good way, exactly what you just said. And I think that's part of, aviation's strength and weakness at the same time. You do something the same way for a long time, it becomes normal, and you try to show somebody a different way to do it, and they look at you funny. And as you said, they expect everybody to be doing it at the same time during the same day, and no on. So before we wrap up, I have a couple more questions for you, if I may. Any small wins recently that made you smile?
I think, like, I've spoken to you about this separately to our podcast or even the invitations of podcasts. But I think my perspective of this has changed massively since becoming a dad. So I've got a 1-year-old daughter at home, as I've mentioned to you, and with
Hmm.
her and with your daughter, yeah, and you've got children as well. You don't measure progress by waiting for one enormous milestone. It's all the small things. So something that she couldn't do yesterday, she now does. It's from a new sound, a new expression, standing up, which is the recent one where she can stand up, take a few steps, she squats back down, understanding something she didn't understand yesterday. All of those small wins. You could put 100 small wins next to each other, and it may just seem like one big win. And strangely, that's how I've came to view Spaero. It genuinely feels like another baby that I've been watching develop, and I've not realised that until becoming a father and still seeing all these tiny little incremental changes. But like one new integration, a new airline signing up, or a new airline understanding the vision, a new supplier connecting, something that previously took 20 clicks turning into taking 2 clicks. None of these
Right.
things individually mean that we've achieved what we're setting out to achieve, and none of these little steps with Hallie are the things that are, that she takes a step, but that doesn't mean she can run now. Um, but I think all of these small little things together are basically the big win at the end. And sometimes, and what I've come to notice actually now is the big wins that we notice are actually just a whole load of small wins that we just didn't notice in the
After
background
another.
happening. Yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna make you laugh. I'm gonna make you wonder where I'm going with this, but let me tell you a short story. So that's a lesson that I learned a long time ago. Instead of just going for that big home run or that impossible goal, just worry about one foot after the other. When
Mhm.
I was in my 20s, my philosophy was I needed to make everything happen, right? I have to do it. I have to make it. I have to achieve it. And then life taught me otherwise, and I'm grateful for that. And so instead of waiting to get around the corner to maybe spot $100 bill sitting on the floor, if I see a five, I'm picking it up. If I see a 20, I'm picking it up. And
Yeah.
those are the small wins that you're talking about, because I think life is a better teacher than anybody would ever give it credit for. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's one of them expressions that we've all heard. I don't know if this is the same expression in America, but we say pennies make pounds. So it's all of them small little, as you just said, all
yeah.
of the fives and the tens make
Mhm.
the $100 note. So it's the pennies make pounds. Yeah, it's
So
definitely something you're taught from a young age, but you don't really
it is.
appreciate it
It
until you
is.
get
It
older.
is. And then if you're lucky enough, life shows you better. So if we were to sit down again, and I hope that we do in 5 years or in 10 years, just pick one of those two, what would make you actually say we changed something?
Uh it wouldn't necessarily be Spaero became the biggest technology company or Spaero solved all of the challenges of the industry, but I would be incredibly proud if the industry itself had changed its expectations. And we mentioned some of them earlier, where someone may expect a fully mature platform the first day they use it, or um, buyers need to, well, not need to, but buyers will eventually start becoming more demanding towards their technology providers of this is we're being enclosed into this environment, and we want our systems to be able to communicate with this because it's really long-winded, having to do it all manually. So I think if an airline procurement manager looked at the systems they're using that they couldn't connect with other technologies and said, like, why are we accepting that? That would be a big win for me. I think if open APIs became the expected kind of technology. If suppliers didn't have to duplicate the same information everywhere and the buyer didn't have to duplicate that, if buyers spent more time making decisions and less time moving the data, um, I think at that point, whether Sparrow caused all of that or influenced it wouldn't really make much of a difference to me. I think I'd be incredibly proud if we could have helped push the industry in that direction.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's the same value prop that I go after every single day. So how do I say this? Let me ask you this. Listen, I'm probably 15 or 20 years older than you, but it doesn't matter. I respect the hell out of you, and I hope you take that the right way. I wanted to ask you, what is the simplest way of describing your vision?
You mentioned it at the start of your call, and I say this all the time. It's connect and don't replace. So aviation doesn't need another technology company telling everybody to throw away, the technology that they already have. It needs
Correct.
systems, companies, and people already powering the supply chain to communicate properly. And I think that's the future I want Spaero to help build.
That's awesome. I love it. You have time for one or two more little questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So it's a little segment I get into once in a while called overtime, right? And I'm not shifting gears, but I'm shifting gears. The first one I call two truths and a lie. Give us two facts and one fib or lie about your aviation adventures, and let's see if we can guess which one is a lie.
Okay, so I've been in the industry for 18 years. Um, I've traveled to 6 continents. I'm a qualified engineer.
Well, I want to say two or three, but I love both of those things. So if I'm gonna flip a coin, let's call it heads. Heads is six continents and tails is engineer. I'm gonna pick heads.
No, so the lie is the qualified engineer. Yeah, I never, and the dream from a young boy never quite materialized, but I wouldn't change a thing.
Awesome. And then one more, if I may. Right, just pick one quick fire style, MRO or airline,
Airline,
AOG panic or inventory calm,
AOG panic,
AI or gut instinct.
gut instinct every time.
100%. And then one last question. What is your dream destination? You get a package in the mail today. It's an open ticket to go anywhere that you want. You can just write in your destination. Where would that be and why?
Well, if I didn't have to consider taking my family with me, and they're more than welcome to come along, but if they don't want to climb the mountain, then I'm not stopping the trip. But Machu Picchu, it's fascinated me from a young boy, and I think it's my dream destination to go to.
I have one more weird question for you, more like a statement that is intended as a question. Ancient Aliens.
Yeah,
You watch it?
yeah,
I love that show. Anyway,
yeah, yeah. We could have another 30-minute conversation
when
about
you
this.
I wrote that down at the beginning of the call when you said Machu Picchu and Petra and the pyramids and a couple of other things, and I was hoping that I wouldn't miss it, but I like that show. I used to laugh at it, then I got involved, and now all of a sudden I like it because it does make me think, right or wrong, it makes me think. Anyway, Miles, I wanted to take another moment and say thank you so much for coming on with me. I very, very much appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate what you actually do and everything that you shared here today. Before we wrap up, if you want people to reach out to you, where can they find you?
LinkedIn, reach out on my website, so spaero.co.uk, or you can email me directly at miles@spaero.co.uk.
Awesome. One more time, thank you so much for hopping on board. I very
Thank you,
much
Ralph.
enjoyed this. Thank you. You have a great afternoon, and I'll talk to
My
you
pleasure.
soon.
You too, Ralph. Thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye. Hang on.